ground to basically conduct ourselves as a nation with civility. We have to have differences of views where there are bound to be differences of opinion and views. The point is, how do we reconcile these views? How do we settle these differences? It cannot be through force, intimidation and fear. It has to be through rationale, offer an argument. You might have your own reasons why you hold your views. The other side will similarly have its own views and opinions. The effort of this university space is to cause a dialogue between these differences in views, not to use force to prevent the other from expressing their views. That is not the culture of a university. So I request you to please attend. I think it is wrong to actually send them out. They should have ideally been present here and they should join the discussion and the debate. Except that there is a certain fear that they would disturb. It's alright, if there is a reason to disturb, they might as well raise their voice. But raise it as a question, not as some noise. That is not the way that we conduct dialogues in the space of a university. So that's my first appeal. Second, I would like to also request some of the friends to record the whole proceeding, because yesterday there was a similar event. Of course here we are, I don't think, screening the documentary, but yesterday there seems to have been a similar event in one of the hotels where Ram Ke Naam was screened. Towards the end of which there was this kind of a ruckus, and interestingly the ones who prevented the screening were sent out, and those that screened the film were arrested and cases were stamped on them. And the allegations that are coming is not about actually screening the document, because you can't make a criminal case out of screening this document. It's a legally valid documentary. It is not a prohibited or a banned documentary. It has received several national awards, and therefore one has an appreciation for the document. One might differ with it. One might say that I have a different point of view. I don't agree with the way that things have been interpreted. That's fine. But mere screening of the documentary is not illegal. Second, they were accused of abusing Hinduism as a religion. Now, this is something which comes through through the hat. It's like anybody can say that my sentiments have been hurt or that somebody has abused. So we need to be careful here that the purpose of this meeting is to not abuse any religion, is not to hurt anybody's sentiments, is not to condemn in any way any kind of ritual or belief or symbols and so on. The purpose of this meeting is only one single point, which is that a holiday, half-day holiday has been declared. Now, half-day's holiday being declared is an implication of the government into a particular religious activity. And in that sense, therefore, we are here to reclaim our republic. The idea that the constitutional morality, the way that it looks at how different people from different religions ought to be treated, how a government ought to be conducting itself with different sections of the population. It is in here that we have a problem. That was this sensible? Was this a right kind of a decision to have declared a half-day holiday throughout the country for this event? Now, the Prime Minister could be there as a person because he has a personal belief. That's fine. As a person, he can be there performing a puja because that is his belief. There can be a ritual, there can be all those processes, precisely because it is happening after the judiciary has proclaimed a particular decision. As citizens, we are bound by the law of the land, and we might have a difference with the way that the judgment has been given. Whether the judiciary was right in terms of entering into a jurisdiction in a theme like God, which is a rhetorical kind of a space, that there is no way we can settle the debate about existence or non-existence of God. Modern jurisprudence would certainly be challenged in terms of the kind of evidence that can be presented, in the way that you can rationally decide on what is happening is right or wrong and so on. So obviously it's a communitarian space. It is a space of faith and belief. and there cannot be a modern way of really concluding on the right and the wrong or the merits and the demerits of this whole process. So the point in question therefore is whether government's implication of itself through a proper order to declare a day, half day's holiday for a particular ritual of a particular religion, is that something which is acceptable? That is the question. And which is where the idea of implicating the republic. And here, as citizens, we all are owners of this republic. It is a republic that all of us own. And we are proclaiming here that we are owners of this republic, in as much as any other citizen is. And to that extent, therefore, the idea as to what is it that the framers of the constitution thought through when they said that the government should not really have a particular color with reference to religion. Government and the state institutions ought to treat all the citizens of this country equal. And here, questions about what are the implications of this and why is it important that we have the state behave in this manner, that it treats every person from every religion as equal. And this is where we also ought to try and understand that there can be right. So the point that we also can debate is whether within the set of interpretations about culture, about Hinduism as a religion, can we really have some way of looking at the cultural practices as being tolerant. And here, I'm recollecting the speech delivered by Swami Vivekananda, in his famous Chicago address, where he takes pride in Hinduism only and precisely because he says that it is one religion which has not invaded other nations or persecuted other communities. So if you say that you take pride, it's another matter that Lakshmidhar Mishra has another kind of a view with reference to the idea of caste system and subjugation of the oppressed caste within this religious practice, the practice of untouchability, and the idea that there was enslavement of the oppressed communities. This is therefore the way that one can appreciate religion, irrespective of or by even ignoring the kind of oppressions that were meted out to people in the past. You are suggesting that the ideal practice of the religion is not to actually oppress or to persecute communities. And if we take that as one of the authentic interpretations of what ought to be the practice of Hindu religion, then obviously any practice which has injured the minorities, those sections of society who may not have voice, because majority is in terms of a number. Of course, it's another matter that whether what calls itself a majority in itself is questionable. Because when you talk about the idea of majority as an elected government, the government has about 37% of vote share in the total votes. And in that sense, therefore, strictly speaking, that ideology which is calling itself the majority representatives has a minority vote share in the total votes. Now culturally, therefore, you might be articulating the idea of a particular religion being majority, but what ought to be the conduct of that majority of population is something either derived from cultural connotations, as in the interpretation of Swami Vivekananda, would certainly suggest that you cannot therefore be, just because you have a brute majority in numbers, be using force or exercising coercion on the minorities. That is not the way that Hinduism as imagined in terms of the authentic interpretation of the idea of dharma permits you to exercise or practice your culture. That is not acceptable. Second, if we really treat what is happening in Ayodhya as a cultural event, there also you seem to be having a controversy. Because here we have the Shankaracharya of Uttarakhand expressing his set of objections, and his set of objections are being drawn from the cultural scripts. And he is supposed to be the authentic cultural representative insofar as the interpretation of the texts are concerned. So you have one civil cultural kind of a representative in Swami Vivekananda, and you have the other religious cultural representative, one who represents the authentic kind of clergy, right, within the Hindu fold, who is saying that holding of this ritual, the Pran Pratishta, is in violation of the Shastras. And he has a very interesting kind of a logic that he is offering. Now one may agree, disagree, right, depending on how you view this kind of a perspective. It's a communitarian perspective. You cannot really be holding it to test therefore on rational terms. So what has been said in the scriptures, in his understanding and interpretation, he is suggesting that the temple is supposed to be the body of the god, and the idol which is being that Pran Pratishta, that is the installing of the idol, is supposed to be giving soul, right, to the temple. So in his interpretation, he is suggesting that when the body is not complete, so he is asking this question, that when a baby is being born, the baby grows in the mother's womb for about 9 months, through the course of which it develops its limbs. It develops its 4 hands, the legs, and the rest of the body, the head, and so on. And then comes the act of deliverance, the act that the baby appears for the public. And he is basically then arguing that here is a situation where the temple construction is incomplete, because the temple is actually 3 floors, and therefore what is called as the dome, right, of the shikhar, the dome of the temple in his interpretation is the face of the god, and that the tip point that you have in the temple is supposed to be the eye of the god. So without the head, without the eyes, without the formation of the neck and the chest, you simply have a ground floor and you have the garbha, right? Is this therefore a complete body for the soul to be installed in this body? Is a question that he is deriving out of the logic of his own scriptures. So culturally also, it seems as if the performance of this ritual does not have consent from everybody. Therefore also there is a need to debate. As civilians, we are in a sense being simply hijacked by force. Because if you are in government, fine, you have a majority in terms of numbers, fine. But a debate about whether or not what you are doing is appropriate or inappropriate, when it is especially being raised on the grounds of the same kind of cultural representatives, Swami Vivekananda, as well as Shankaracharya of Uttarakhand. These are authentic representations of what you claim is the culture that you are taking forward. When they are raising objections and you use force in order to coerce the civilians not to engage in a debate, that is unacceptable. Because what is happening then is that even when, this is what happened when a priest visited our home and we had a dialogue about the nature of governance and so on. Now if you have a situation tomorrow where a section of people who claim to be representing the interests of the religion occupy temple lands, would the priest have the courage to raise the voice and say that I object to this? Or would he also be intimidated and coerced because of the exercise of force in giving up that temple land? This is a question I asked him. Because this is what in a sense happened even in the context of the Ram Janmabhoomi temple. There is evidence suggesting that the temple land transaction involved massive corruption. Should we or should we not raise voice against those who have basically been beneficiaries, who have illegally, immorally benefited out of the sale and the resale of this land? Should we have the democratic freedom and the liberties to raise these questions about the conduct of those who have in a sense hurt the sentiments of those who are the believers. So here you have a set of believers and you have the set of people who are rallying the believers in the name of the believers. See, when I remember, I was in Netherlands when the United States invaded Iraq, and there was a huge kind of a procession of the Dutch people, a variety of them, different kinds of hues of political practice. Lakhs of them mobilized, and they were holding one placard saying, "Niche in my naam, not in my name." So if there are practicing Hindus and if they believe that what has happened to Bilkis Bano is unfair, is an injustice, is inhuman, should they or should they not have the right to raise their voice and take objection to what has happened to her? Hinduism also has a variety of characters. Like for instance, if you talk about the religion of Ravana, or if you talk about religion of Duryodhana and Dusyasana, they are also Hindus. You talk about religion of Kamsa who killed children, that fellow is also a Hindu. Just because you are a Hindu doesn't mean that you can actually take a moral position or a high moral ground. No, it is about your praxis. What are you doing? If you rape a woman, kill her child, and kill large number of her members of her family, of a member who is unarmed, who is helpless, she was 18 years then. Could we be justifying this? Could we be defending this? Could these people become the representatives of our dharma, of our practice, of our culture? You have one more group of people who killed a 7-year-old baby in Kashmir. She was a tribal girl, Gujar, Muslim girl, and they raped her right in the temple and banged her head against the temple wall and killed her. And there's a large procession by lawyers who owe their allegiance to this particular ideology, taking objection to filing cases against these criminals who did this act on that baby. Should we take this as our culture? Should we accept this interpretation and this practice of culture in the name of the religion that many of you might identify with? Should we or should we not raise these questions? Is it valid or invalid to say that this is not the kind of practice that we approve of? This is neither coming from scriptures nor is it coming from the authentic civic interpretations of what this religion stands for. You have yet another instance in what has happened to our female wrestlers. The female wrestlers who were abused, who were harassed, when they came out saying that, look, this is what is happening to us. What did and where did this particular ideology stand? Who did it protect? It protected Brijbhushan Singh, who perpetrated those kinds of atrocities and injustices on our most decorated Olympic medal winners. Is this the kind of practice that we associate ourselves with? Is this the kind of practice that we think or we can own up as something which is authentic cultural practice? Are these groups capable of interpreting the religion and practicing it in the right spirit? Should we or should we not therefore discuss critically and raise these questions? The other is with reference to what they did to the farmers. 700 farmers died struggling against the farm laws. And of these 700 farmers, many might have been Muslims, but many might have also been not Muslims. They would have been Hindus as well. And large number of both the Muslim families as well as the Hindu families would have been contributing to sending their own children to participate in the armed forces as well. And all these populations have been accused of being Khalistanis. Where are we heading? What is the logic of this? That you use religious identity to suppress people's struggles, democratic aspirations, by merely tarnishing everybody by calling them terrorists. Can this be permitted? Can a very justified demand against the farm laws be branded as a demand coming from toolkits, from international conspiracy, Soros, What is this nonsense going on? These are aspirations of our own farmers. Large sections of these farmers would have suffered the fate that South Indian farmers have suffered already. 2.5 lakh farmers have committed suicide on account of introduction of a variety of neoliberal policies. And here, of course, I would also be critical of our Congress friends, that in a sense our policies perhaps have contributed to the rise of this moral hollowness, because of which the right wing has occupied that vacuum of space by trying to bring in or fill up that moral space, by grabbing that moral space, by trying to therefore subvert that space. Because the notion of a community, the idea of solidarity across citizenship is not possible when you do not have a authentic moral frame. The constitutional morality, the directive principles, therefore give a certain kind of a direction. It's a compass. It tells us why we have formed this nation. What is the purpose? What is it that we have to pursue as an objective? And this is where the idea that equality is a revered principle, liberties are a revered principle. How do you achieve fraternity when you keep hating your own neighbor? How can an ideology of hate mongering be a source of solace? It is like, you're caught up in a certain kind of a religious frenzy where you're not asking a question as to what is this governance contributing to my life? In what way has 10 years of this rule contributed to the betterment of my life? Large number of educated unemployed, huge inflation, large number of small industries closing down on account of demonetization, huge number of problems similarly with GST. There are enormous challenges that different sections of society are facing. Instead of raising these questions, you are tending to moralize each time a critique is raised by dubbing the critique as a vested interest, as something which is subversive, as something which is anti-national, as something which draws its interest either from American funding or alliance with China or Pakistan. This is the only language, rhetoric which keeps flowing all the time. You're not addressing the critique. You're not answering the critique. You're not basically trying to therefore resolve the problem. Answering the critique, and critique is not about merely engaging in a critique for critique's sake. The point is that if there is a critique and there is a valid reason that the criticism has, it is based on a certain dimension of truth. And if you do not address that truth, it is not in the interest of the nation. Because if not today, tomorrow the markets might crash. If you say that there is a major fraud that is going on in sections of the finance, if you say that the institutions are not being neutral, they're not performing their job in the way that they ought to, then it leads to a certain kind of a crisis, a mounting crisis, which might end up making the banks lose their liquidity. It might end up creating even greater crisis. Like for instance, just yesterday I was talking in another meeting. They have one policy of ethanol blending with petrol, and the ethanol, a large part of it, 332 crore liters, is being produced by the use of rice. And we have a hunger index, global hunger index report, which has given 112th rank to India, much below countries like Congo, Nigeria, Zimbabwe and Zambia, African countries which are far, far more backward than ourselves. And it puts 80% of our children as lacking nutrition. It puts 36% of our children as suffering from wasting, long-term kind of denial of nutrition, leading to stunted growth that has consequences intergenerationally. These are the questions in the light of which then you are seeking resolutions for a policy like production of ethanol with rice. If you take objection to this, then immediately you say that, look, you are preventing development. Whose development? What development? Who has formed development? What relief have you given to poor sections of society? What has happened to the migrants, during the COVID? Raising of these questions is not fragmenting the nation. It is in the interest of the long-term solidarity that we ought to raise these questions. Because otherwise you are pushing large sections of society to the wall. You are making them feel helpless, voiceless. You are bound to see, conditions of civil war. We know what happened in Egypt. We know what happened in Sri Lanka. We know what happened in the Occupy Wall Street, even in the United States, the kind of invasion of the Capitol. All these are signals and signs of massive social crisis. People not finding methods and means of livelihood and basic survival. This is a very dangerous trend. That when you are mounting such a massive crisis in the society, we should have freedoms to critique, to raise signals and voices, to point out from where the crisis is getting generated and how best we can address the crisis. And this is what you are preventing us from doing, because you are just pushing the whole logic into a frenzy of imagination which is based on religion. Faith, you have faith, you have religion, it's fine. That's completely acceptable. But religion and culture and symbols like Ram cannot be used as coercive tools to prevent people from raising questions. It cannot be made a potent weapon against our republic, against our constitution, against legality. You cannot lynch a person and then try and justify that you have done it in national interest. Yes, voiceless cows ought to be protected. There are a large number of animal lovers. Fine. But what is the idea of being in love with an animal? Being in love with an animal implies that you have had the capacity to go beyond loving human beings of your own species. You ought to be, therefore, expressing and imbibing such levels of humanity that it represents that kind of humanity. In the name of humanity, you kill human beings. That's not the way that culture preaches how you ought to be protecting animals. So if humanity implies that it has developed so much that you are able to express affection and love for other species other than yourselves, then the practice ought to be so very rigorous that you ought to preserve that idea of humanity that underlies it. In the name of humanity, you cannot weaponize that humanity in the name of cows to kill innocent people. That is unacceptable. You can't be bulldozing the houses of poor people. Don't rich people have illegal constructions? Don't they have properties which they have amassed illegally? How many rich people's houses have you demolished? Each time you demolish the home of a poor person, you destroy their livelihoods. This is not justice. This is not the way that we have been geared to understand what ought to be done by government. Governance, state, constitutional morality says has to weigh its force on the side of the oppressed, on the side of the weak. You cannot be using your force on the weak in the name of the majority and brute force. This is unacceptable. What has happened to the girl in Hathras? Unacceptable. Can you do that in the name of culture, religion, nationalism? Is that the job of the police? And here I also appeal to my police friends. Just think what you're doing. You're also, I think, getting sucked into this whole frenzy of religion and culture. Your job, if there is an attack on a cultural, on an event like this, where a question is being debated, you have to protect our liberty to debate. Your job is not to also become part of the disruptors and to prevent the debate from happening. This is, look at the tragedy of the situation. That's what I've been telling, to my NSUI friends. This is a state where Congress is in government and you are having to fight so much to do what is legally and constitutionally totally a legitimate act of holding a debate and a dialogue on something which is controversial. Universities are meant to debate issues which are controversial, where there are differences of views. Just to even appreciate, not to necessarily take sides and become polarized. No. Even to appreciate the arguments. Why there is a difference of view? I mean, should we not really make ourselves aware? Is it that we know everything? No. In the arguments that we present, there could be some lacune that you point out. That is how both of us can contribute to each other's knowledge. And that is the reason why we have universities as space. We will debate everything, discuss everything. What is the point in using force and preventing dialogue and debate? If you come and prevent me from holding a debate, neither you learn nor I learn. You have to learn from me, I have to learn from you. Maybe you have something that I can learn. instead of expressing your views, you are simply preventing the other persons from expressing their views, and you are therefore wanting to demonstrate your force. You are wanting to demonstrate your domination rather than your intellect, your reason, your arguments. This is not the culture that is appreciated in the universities. This is not the way to conduct oneself in the university space. So I think with those words I will stop. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity.